Hello guys, welcome to Motorasium. Sometimes I speak with my friends about the sales of the car, and since they know that I work like product manager, they ask me about the sales volumes of different car brand. Well, today I would like to speak about the sales of Ferrari. Speaking about how many Ferrari has been sold during the years. So first we see the graphic, we see the sales, and then we comment the data, trying to understand what's happened during the years. Well, first of all, let's see the graphic. I checked this data, they are from Wikipedia in English language, and I checked the source of the data and they are pretty accurate because from 1997 they are from the annual report of Fiat Chrysler, that was the owner of Ferrari, and then from the Ferrari annual report. Before the 1997 they are from a different press conference, a different catalog, but are pretty accurate. There is only something that I don't want to speak too much about now because it's a quite boring and complicated topics for people that work in the car sales business, and is about how you count the sales of the car, because you can count the sales when the car is sold, when the car is shipped, when there are different criteria, and these data are not with the same criteria of counting the sales. Frankly speaking, they are important only for marketing strategies in a short term, but we consider the sales of Ferrari in the long term, or Ferrari but even other companies, they are not such important. So I would say that these data are pretty reliable. First consideration about this graphic. It's very important when we consider the sales of a company to know about the property of the company. Who is the owner of the company? Who is the owner of Ferrari in this case? Well, there are some important passages of the history of Ferrari. As you know, Ferrari was founded by Enzo Ferrari in 1947, and the first important change in the property was in 1969. At that year, Fiat, that was at that time the larger car manufacturer in Italy, bought the 50% of the Ferrari share. The second important change in the ownership of Ferrari was in 1988, because Enzo Ferrari died in 1988, and at that time Fiat bought the 90% of Ferrari, so became the main shareholder of the company. The rest of Ferrari share, 10%, was the hand of the son of Enzo Ferrari, Piero Ferrari. The third and very important passage of the history of Ferrari was the 2015. As you probably remember, Ferrari became a public company in 2015. It got listed in New York Stock Exchange and in the Milan Stock Exchange. And from this moment, so around 5 years ago, Ferrari is no more part of the Fiat and Fiat Chrysler group, but is an independent company. Now, despite the owner of Fiat Chrysler, now Stellantis, is Exor Group, that is basically the company of the financial company of John Elkann, that is the president of Fiat Chrysler and now Stellantis and Ferrari. But Ferrari now has the same owner, let me say, the same person that owned the majority of the companies, but is a full independent company compared to Fiat Chrysler. And that is very important, especially as we see later about the sales volume. Let's start making some consideration about the Ferrari sales during the year. First of all, we see that Ferrari sales increased quite a lot during the years. That is pretty obvious because Ferrari has been a very successful company, and if we take all the car companies that are successful, that are on the market now, we see that the sales grow quite a lot, because also the car market grew very much during the last years after the Second World War. And that is is important because we see that the world GDP grew quite a lot during the years, and when the world GDP growth, when the GDP in general grow, the car that are a cyclical product, they sell more car. That is true for mass car and also for luxury car. In the recent times, there are three main points, let me say, in which the Ferrari sales decline. The first one was the beginning of the 70s. At that time, probably, if your grandmother or your parents tell you, there was the oil crisis in which the price of the oil became skyrocket. It was not only the point of the price, but also in many countries in the world there was a shortage about oil. Some government, including the Italian one, make some laws in which it was not possible to use the car during the weekend, for example. And at that period the sales of the car declined, of course. It was a period that we speak about in another video. Some car manufacturers introduce a car with less horsepower, included supercar with less fuel consumption, etc, etc. Is an interesting period, we speak in another video. The second moment in which the sales of Ferrari declined was the beginning of the 80s. At that time there was a world crisis in which the world GDP decreased, not decreased, but there's a slowdown of the world GDP. The crisis was especially strong in the United States of America, that was the biggest market for Ferrari. The third moment of sales decline was the beginning of the 90s, you see, every 10 years more or less. At that point there was the crisis, a general crisis in the world, and in Italy was probably stronger than in other places because at that time we didn't have the euros but the lira, the Italian lira, and at that time was our currency was under pressure, and it was a difficult period for companies in Italy. And then we know that in the year 2000 the sales were more or less stable. There was the crisis in Asia. In general, we remember the crisis in 2007 and 2011 in Europe. But at this point there is an interesting aspect, because you see that the sales of Ferrari was more or less stable from the year 2007 till 2015. What's happened? At that time, the CEO of Ferrari, the head of Ferrari, was Luca Cordero di Montezemolo. And he declared at that time that the target of Ferrari was to maintain the sales of Ferrari at around 7,000 units a year. Because the idea, they studied, their marketing department studied that to maintain the exclusivity of the brand Ferrari in the world, they have to keep the sales at around 7,000 units. And that was the mentality of Ferrari, the strategic commercial strategy of Ferrari for some years till 2015. Because as you remember, something changed in 2015. Ferrari became a public company. It got quoted in, it was listed like an independent company. Luca Cordero di Montezemolo resigned like CEO of Ferrari. And at that time, the new management of Ferrari decided that the 7,000 units limit was not a more, let me say, a target, because they think that they can maintain the exclusivity of the Ferrari brand, even selling 7,000 units more. We'll discuss later about the strategies. Ferrari sold more units in 2019 than 2020. I don't think that the main problem was about the sales of the orders of Ferrari, but as you know, in Italy the company is closed for a couple of months in April and May 2020. So Ferrari, like most of the other Italian company, lost a couple of months of production because the factory was closed. Probably during the summer many Italian companies work more in order to compensate the closing of a couple of months, but you know, you cannot compensate completely a couple of months of closing. Another consideration about the sales of Ferrari is about where the cars are sold. We see that Ferrari sold around 4,000 units at the year 2000, and in 2019 more than 9,000 units, so a strong increase, more than the double of the units. And one question we can ask is where the cars are sold, in what geographical area. I read the annual report of Ferrari of the year 2000, the annual report of Fiat at that time, in the annual report of Ferrari of the year 2020. And there are some considerations, some area in which can think about. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly where Ferrari sold the car, because Ferrari declared only the sales in some country, not for all the country in the world. However, we can have a more or less accurate idea by seeing the numbers that are available. In the year 2000, this Ferrari sales in USA and Europe was around 83%, so quite a huge number. Unfortunately, we don't have the sales data of United States of America for the year 2020 because Ferrari declared the number of the sales in Americas. That means included Canada, Mexico, Brazil, etc., etc., and not only United States. However, if we combine United States, Americas, and Europe, the Ferrari sales are 75%. I checked some data around, I make some research, and I would say that it's quite accurate to say that the sales of USA and Europe, if we exclude Canada, Mexico, Africa, are around 70%. So what's important is that part of the growth of Ferrari sales is related with new markets. Essentially, if we see that in the rest of the world, in the year 2000 was making around 700 units, and now the rest of the world is making more than 2,500 units. So a big contribution of the Ferrari sales are what they are called emerging market that growth in the last 20 years that are accounting for a huge part of the Ferrari growth. On the other side, we see that the sales of Ferrari was very strong also in USA and Europe in general. We have the data of some country. Like I say, they don't declare the numbers of all the countries in the world, but we see a strong growth, for example, in Germany, in UK. I was a bit surprised by the sales of Ferrari in China and Middle East. Starting from China, I never worked in China and I never studied the Chinese market, so it's a pure consideration about personal feeling, let me say. I was expecting that China was the second largest market in the world after United States of America, and I was quite surprised to see that in 2019 just a bit more than 400 units has been sold in China. That is more or less the same number of cars that has been sold in Italy. Yeah, I don't know, my personal feeling was to have a biggest number, let me say. I know that in China there are some rules about fuel consumption and pollution, especially in some cities of China, the largest one of course, in which most of the millionaires are living. And I know that the tax on a luxury car are quite high. It is confirmed by the annual report of Ferrari, in which they underline that the market share of Ferrari in China is around 20% in the luxury car market. That is more or less the same that we have in other markets. So the point is not that Ferrari is not selling in China. The point is that in China the luxury car market is not such high like I was expecting, frankly speaking. So that was quite a surprise. I would like to study more the Chinese market one day that I will have time. I want to understand how the regulations are working in China. The same for Middle East. I mean, in Middle East, thinking about Dubai, for example, it came in my mind Ferrari, McLaren, Maserati, Porsches, so luxury car in general. So I was expecting that in Middle East the sales of Ferrari in general, but in general luxury car was very, very high. Well, that is not. I mean, in all the Middle East, Ferrari give us the data for all Middle East, including Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, etc., etc. The Ferrari sold in 1 year was around 300 units. So far less, not far less, but less than Italy, for example. Well, yeah, my feeling, my personal feeling was to having the same number of Italy, more or less. So not the largest market, of course, like United States, but I was not expecting such a low number of units again. That probably because they are all concentrated in few cities like Dubai, and give you the perception that in Dubai is full of Ferrari. I give you this data to, let me say, to think about for us, like the data many times are different from the perception of the people. Another point is about the Ferrari product strategy. If we see the lineup of Ferrari in the year 2000, 20 years ago, and the Ferrari lineup today, after 20 years, we see that Ferrari has launched quite a large number of models compared to 20 years ago. And that is very important in my opinion, and it was due to a precise strategy of Ferrari to preserve the value of the brand and the value of a used Ferrari. because you can increase the number of sales by keeping the same number of models. Sometimes it's not always possible, but in that case you have more units, more cars of the same model on the market. So what's happened? The value of the car for collectors, but even for normal owners, decrease because you have a vast, let me say, availability on the market of such a car. And if you do more models, if you change more model during the times and you introduce more model and you increase the volume by adding model, you have that there are few units available for each model, and so it preserves the value of the car in the future for collectors. And also, again, I say collectors in general because we know that Ferrari has a huge market of collectors, but also for normal people that buy maybe and change the Ferrari every 2 or 3 years because they want a new model, and when they resell them, the value of the car is higher compared to other even luxury brand. So in my opinion, it is a very intelligent strategy to increase the number of sales of Ferrari by adding new models and not simply sell more Ferrari in general. To conclude, guys, that is true, but we have to consider also another aspect. If we consider the sales of Ferrari, I don't want to say during the 60s or the 70s, but even the sales of single models of Ferrari in the 90s, the volumes of our single model was very low compared to modern Ferrari. So if we take a Ferrari F355 or a Ferrari F348, the sales volume of such model are very limited compared to the Ferrari V8 that we have now on the market. And that is why sometimes people ask me why the value of old Ferrari is such high. Well, the point is very simple, because there are the production of old Ferrari. I'm speaking also about Ferrari of the 90s again, or 80s, not on the very rare Ferrari from the 50s, 70s. The value of the production of such model even in the 90s was very limited compared to the volumes that we have today. And we have to consider that we have collectors from other areas in the world, like from Middle East, from China, for example, that wants a Ferrari. They look for old Ferrari, and they are available in very few numbers, very few units. Some of them, but not too many, has been destroyed. Sometimes some of them are in the hands of collectors that don't want to sell the cars. So in general way, the point is now the old Ferraris are made in very limited numbers, and if you want one, even not super rare, they are very few on the market, and collectors are willing to pay a high price to have the few available for sales in the market. And that's why the price of old Ferrari in the last 10, 15, 20 years skyrocket, because there are more collectors in the world, in different parts of the world. They want Ferraris, and Ferraris are available in a few units, mainly in United States of America and Europe and Japan. And so guys, I can speak for more, but I think that the video is getting too long. So thank you for watching. We'll see in another video, and I'm thinking about making some video about speaking about the strategy of a single model, the strategy about launching new models, etc, etc. Not only about Ferrari, but in general. And thank you for watching. See you in another video. Bye bye from Motorasium.